It was supposed to be a simple hearing until J.D. Vance went too far. His attack on struggling cities backfired when Jasmine Crockett fired back with cold, hard facts. The room went silent and America went wild. Did Jasmine Crockett just end J.D. Vance's biggest moment? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing room was silent, too silent. Cameras hovered, red lights blinking, millions watching. The banner read, Federal Housing Reform, but everyone knew this was no policy talk. It was a war of worlds. Truth versus prejudice, reality versus performance. Jasmine Crockett sat ready, her binder stacked with data, photos, and letters from families losing their homes. Every line on her face carried a story. Pain turned into purpose. She wasn't just here to argue, she was here to fight for the forgotten. Then the doors slammed open. J.D. Vance walked in like he owned the place. Tailored suit, smug smile, eyes sharp like a predator. He didn't greet anyone. He didn't have to. His smirk said it all. I'm here to hunt. The room tightened. The air crackled. Two worlds, one polished, one scarred, were about to collide on live television. The air hadn't moved since J.D. Vance entered, and now he made sure every eye was on him. He raised his hand slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he knows the camera will catch it. Madam Chair, he said, his voice smooth but sharp, I have a question for Representative Crockett. The room shifted. Reporters leaned forward, microphones angled like rifles. Jasmine sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her binder untouched. The hum of tension grew heavier, thick enough to feel. Vance leaned into the microphone, the smile never leaving his face. Mrs. Crockett, he began, voice dripping with mock concern. Why do you keep pouring federal money into cities filled with riots, homelessness, and failure under your leadership? What good is throwing money into a black hole? The sentence landed like a grenade. Heads turned, whispers rippled across the chamber. Vance waited, savoring the silence that followed. He wasn't asking for an answer. He was setting a trap. He tilted his head slightly, pretending to think, then added with a quiet chuckle, maybe you want to keep the chaos alive, so you can keep asking for more funding? The sarcasm sliced through the stillness. A few aides shifted uncomfortably. Others smirked, knowing exactly what he was doing. Vance wasn't debating policy. He was going for blood. His eyes locked on Jasmine, cold and gleaming, the look of a man who believed he had already won. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied, and delivered the final jab. The cities you defend, he said, voice rising just enough for the cameras to catch every word. People call them kingdoms of failure, Madam Representative. Gasps scattered through the room. A low murmur rolled across the hearing like thunder before a storm. The cameras zoomed in, flashing between Jasmine's steady face and Vance's smug grin. The attack had landed. Not on data, not on policy, but on pride, race, and dignity. Jasmine didn't move. Her gaze stayed fixed on him, sharp and silent, her hand resting on the thick stack of files in front of her. Every inch of her body radiated restraint, the kind that only comes before something explosive. The air was electric, too tight to breathe. For a moment, no one dared speak. The battle lines were drawn, and Jasmine was about to strike back. The silence after Vance's attack was brutal. It hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Cameras stayed fixed on Jasmine Crockett, waiting, hunting for a crack in her calm. But she didn't flinch. She took a slow breath, eyes steady, voice low and even. Not failure, she said, each word like the strike of a gavel. It's the consequence of systematic abandonment. The line hit differently, quiet but lethal. You could feel the tension shift. She reached for the binder in front of her and opened it with care. Pages filled with data, maps, and photos. Her tone never rose, but every word carried the weight of truth. Highways were built to slice through black neighborhoods, she said, pointing to a government map projected on the screen behind her. Entire communities were split in half so that wealthier districts could commute faster. The image showed lines of concrete cutting through clusters of small homes. The audience didn't move. Even the air felt still. Jasmine turned another page, her finger tracing red zones drawn across city maps. Then came redlining, she said. Decades of policies that stole families' chances to build wealth, to own homes, to pass something on. Her voice deepened, raw with memory, but controlled. You don't erase that kind of damage overnight. Not with one grant, not with one headline. The words echoed through the chamber, deliberate and measured. It wasn't anger. It was precision. She looked directly at Vance now. No hesitation. Dallas pays billions in federal taxes every year, she said clearly. This isn't begging. This is justice. Her hand pressed flat against the table as she finished. The sentence wasn't shouted. It was carved. Each syllable deliberate, each pause intentional. Vance's smirk faltered for the first time. He shifted slightly, his pen tapping against the desk in uneven rhythm. The room froze. Aides who had been whispering seconds ago stopped mid-sentence. One reporter's hand trembled above the keyboard. A cameraman swallowed hard, keeping his lens locked on Jasmine's face. The only sound was the faint hum of air conditioning, almost drowned by the collective breath no one dared release. For a long, heavy moment, Jasmine stood at the center of that silence, unshaken, unbroken. Her calm had become its own kind of weapon. Across the room, even those who came ready to doubt her were staring now, caught between discomfort and respect. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a reversal. In one move, she'd changed the story. The woman they tried to paint as a defender of failure had just turned into the voice of the abandoned. The hearing no longer belonged to J.D. Vance. It belonged to her. The silence after Jasmine's words was still rippling through the room when J.D. Vance suddenly laughed. A sharp, dismissive sound that broke the air like glass. He leaned forward, lips curled into a mocking grin. "It's 2025, madam," he said, voice laced with arrogance. "When will you people stop blaming the past and start taking responsibility?" His tone wasn't just cold. It was surgical, designed to wound. The reporter's head snapped up. The sound of his words echoed in the marble chamber like a slap. He didn't stop there. "Or perhaps," Vance continued, leaning back with a smirk, "you'd prefer this generation to live forever on the excuse of, 'We were wronged once upon a time'?" The way he said it, slow, taunting, made it clear he wasn't debating policy anymore. He was targeting Jasmine herself and everything she stood for. The attack wasn't just intellectual, it was personal, meant to strip her credibility in front of millions. Around the room, the atmosphere shifted. A few senators shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. One aide dropped a pen. The small clatter sounded deafening in the heavy quiet. Cameras zoomed in on Jasmine's face, waiting for a reaction, waiting to see if she'd crack. Vance folded his arms, convinced he'd delivered the knockout. His eyes gleamed with confidence, the predator satisfied. But Jasmine didn't move, not a word, not a blink. Her stillness was unnerving, like the calm before a storm. Vance's smile lingered, unaware he'd just handed her the perfect opening. The hearing room didn't know it yet, but the real fight was about to begin, and that's when Jasmine opened the file. She slid a tabbed binder toward the mic and lifted a report, the seal bright under the lights. "Federal Poverty Assessment 2023. This is not opinion," she said evenly. "This is federal data." The screen behind her blinked alive, a county map breathing in harsh reds and oranges. "The most severe poverty concentrates in rural America," she read, "including multiple counties in Ohio." The title bar burned across the broadcast. 2023 Federal Report. Rural poverty, highest severity, Ohio included. Jasmine turned a page and read the figures out loud, steady and unhurried. 21 Ohio counties flagged in the highest tier, thousands of households in substandard housing, hundreds of structures condemned. She clicked the remote, and a photo from Chillicothe, Ohio filled the wall. A collapsing roof, plastic tarps, a cracked window with an orange extension cord snaking through the glass. Another photo replaced it, a cramped kitchen, a space heater on the linoleum, a faucet wrapped in tape, brown stains scarring the sink. She didn't rush, letting each image settle. "You say my city is a failure, but right inside your own state, People are living in rotten houses, without electricity, without clean water, she said, voice low but razor clean. The cameras crept closer. No one coughed, no one moved. She flipped to a data table. Footnotes glowed at the bottom of the slide like warning lights. Persistent poverty classification, multiple rural counties, she read. Reported housing defects, structural, plumbing, electrical. Another click, a bar graph showing rural households spending a crushing share of income on rent and repairs. This isn't a headline, she said. It's a ledger of neglect. A final photograph from Chillicothe appeared, a hallway with peeling paint and exposed wiring, and the room seemed to shrink around it. Then she turned the blade. Roll call records, she said, lifting printed vote sheets as a new slide appeared. Timestamps, bill numbers, columns of yea and nay. Her finger followed a line down the page. Here are your no votes, Senator. Rural housing grants, water and sewer upgrades, emergency heating assistance. She let the words hang, then placed the papers flat so the camera could see the nay column in black ink. Jasmine produced evidence that J.D. Vance had voted against the bills that would have helped them, and she did it without raising her voice. For a long beat, the only sound was the soft whir of the projectors. The director cut to a tight shot of Vance. His face shifted a shade. Not much, but enough for viewers to feel the drop. The pen in his hand started a staccato tap against the desk, an involuntary metronome in the heavy quiet. An aide glanced at him, then back at the screen where Chillicothe's damp walls and taped-off sink refused to blink. Reporters froze over their keyboards, tracking every frame, every breath. Jasmine didn't fill the silence. She kept it, and in that silence, the evidence did the talking. The lights dimmed slightly as Jasmine leaned forward, her tone dropping into something raw and human. Let's talk about what this really means, she said, because behind every number, there's someone waiting for an answer. The audience leaned in. Her eyes flicked from one senator to another. There's Mrs. Leona in Dallas, she began. She's called my office every week for 3 months about her housing file. 3 months of hold music, 3 months of promises. And every time she asks, will someone call me back before the sheriff does? Jasmine paused, letting the question hang. That's what failure looks like. Not the people, but the system that stops hearing them. She clicked the remote. A photo appeared, a dented pickup parked under a streetlight. This is Carlos, she said quietly. He's a high school senior who sleeps in that truck. He keeps his textbooks under the seat, showers at the gym, studies under stadium lights because he has nowhere else to go. On exam day, he parks behind the grocery store, brushes his teeth in the mirror, and still shows up early. You call that a riot zone? I call that grit. The audience barely breathed. The story was no longer about statistics, it was about survival. Another click. A new image filled the screen. A small kitchen in Ohio, the oven door hanging open, a chair dragged close to its blue flame. And this is Terry, Jasmine said, her voice tightening. 61 years old, living in Ohio. Your state senator. His furnace broke in December. He's been heating his house with that oven for months. He sits there every night, coat on, praying the flame doesn't go out before morning. She looked straight at Vance. That's not ancient history. That's right now. Jasmine closed the binder slowly, her voice calm but edged like steel. Leona, Carlos, Terry, they're not enemies. They're the same story told in different zip codes. But you, Senator, she said, eyes locked on Vance, you've turned them against each other. You made them believe they have to fight for scraps while you argue about blame. The room froze. Reporters stopped typing. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. For the first time, the hearing didn't feel like a debate. It felt like judgment. The room was still trembling from her last line when Jasmine took a slow breath. Her voice softened, but it carried more weight than before. You want to talk about responsibility? She said, eyes locked on Vance. Then let's talk about mine. She leaned closer to the microphone, her tone steady, personal. I was 13 when my family got evicted. I remember our furniture on the sidewalk, the couch, the lamp, my brother's backpack. My little brother thought we were moving to a new house. She stopped, the silence hitting harder than any word. That was the first time I learned what it means to lose everything. The chamber froze. The echo of her words filled the air like a heartbeat. Nobody dared to shuffle a paper or clear a throat. Jasmine stood there, not as a politician, but as someone who had lived the very suffering the hearing was pretending to solve. The reporters looked up from their keyboards. The camera zoomed in until her eyes filled the screen. She wasn't performing. She was remembering. She straightened slightly, her voice regaining the rhythm of conviction. "I know what it feels like to be invisible," she said. "I know what it's like when the world tells you your pain is your fault. When you're poor and black in a city, they call you lazy. When you're poor and white in the country, they say you've been left behind. Same hunger, same cold, same fear, just different labels." Her tone sharpened, like metal striking stone. "And that," she said, pointing gently toward the dais, "that is not policy. That is prejudice." The line cut through the chamber like a thunderclap. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. A senator across the aisle looked down, shifting in his seat. One aide closed her laptop quietly, as if the clicking keys might break the spell. Jasmine didn't move, didn't smile. She let the weight of her words settle into every corner of the room. She looked back at Vance, her gaze unwavering. "So when you tell me to stop talking about the past," she said, voice low but unshakable, "remember, for some of us, the past isn't over. It's still happening." Vance's jaw tightened. His hand twitched on the table, the pen motionless now. The smugness was gone. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. The man who had come in grinning now sat frozen, cornered not by anger, but by truth. Jasmine let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "The people you mock are the people I came from," she said finally. "They are not your talking points. They are not your punchlines. They are America." The words hit with the force of something undeniable. Not a soundbite, but a revelation. Vance sat back slowly, eyes down, his confidence cracked. For the first time all morning, he didn't interrupt. He couldn't. The chamber's silence didn't end in the room. It shattered on the outside first. Within minutes, the clip was ripped from the live feed and hurled across platforms like a flare. Headlines sprinted to catch it. Push alerts lit phones and elevators, buses, checkout lines. View counters spun like odometers. Over 3 million views in a few hours, with comments stacking faster than the server could sort them. The split screen, Jasmine steady, Vance blinking, became the frame everyone shared. By dinner, the clip wasn't just viral. It was ambient noise, playing on muted TVs above bar tops and in laundromats. The first wave was raw and unscripted, faces and names from Dallas to Ohio. A barber in South Dallas filmed himself pointing at the screen and said, "I'm not in her party, but she's right." A nurse's aide in Columbus typed the same line in a late shift lull, then pinned it so her cousins would see it by morning. "I'm not in her party, but she's right." A feed store owner in Ross County posted a photo of his loading dock TV with the caption, "I'm not in her party, but she's right." The sentence marched across timelines like a single drumbeat, easy to memorize, impossible to ignore. It didn't come from an influencer. It came from people who rarely speak up. By nightfall, anchors were saying what the scroll bars were already declaring, a historic moment in the hearing room. Editorial boards carved out extra columns. Even the weekend magazine shows rushed a segment with slowed replays and closed caption pauses. The Karen producers picked their favorite freeze frame. Jasmine's hand flat on the table, the map of rural poverty behind her, and ran it again and again. Commentators argued over strategy while the audience replayed the silence, the breath between "this isn't begging" and "this is justice." The label stuck because it felt earned, not engineered. It was less spectacle than reckoning, and the press knew it. Then came the counter-programming, brief, beige, and doomed. J.D. Vance released a statement filled with filler, the kind of paragraph that collapses when you touch it. He blamed partisan theatrics, promised serious conversations, and offered no specifics. The public pounced. The replies read like a chorus line, snapping in perfect time. The most repeated question was a 7-word hammer. "Do you have facts or just slogans?" It rolled under the statement, over it, around it, a ring of fire that a press office can't step through. In churches, job sites, and buses idling outside night classes, something else moved, relief wearing the shape of recognition. Black voters and poor workers said it out loud to neighbors, supervisors, and strangers clutching the same phone. "That's my life." A cafeteria cashier watched the clip on break and cried without wiping her eyes. A warehouse picker played it twice, then sent it to his mother with a single line. "Listen to the part about the oven." They weren't celebrating a takedown. They were processing the shock of being described with precision, without pity. Even the party lines in Ohio bent for a moment, like cables under unusual load. A county GOP chair forwarded the clip to his own list with a note he didn't expect to send. "She's making a case we need to hear." Letters trickled into Jasmine's office from towns with 2 stoplights and an old mill. Handwritten, typed, scrawled in shaky blue pen. The sentence that kept arriving felt both defiant and relieved. "She's right about us." It wasn't a conversion. It was an admission that pain recognizes itself, even when it's wearing different colors. The nonprofits moved like they'd been training for this release. Housing clinics clipped the Chillicothe images into funder decks within hours, pairing them with intake logs and waiting lists. Legal aid groups built one-page sign-up forms around the clip and watched intakes spike. Tenant unions cut the silence before "this is justice" into a 15-second call to action and stitched it to hotline numbers. A coalition director said what their staff had been feeling for years, but rarely felt heard saying on air: "We don't need a miracle. We need plumbing, heaters, and votes." The clip wasn't the strategy, but it became the spark that made the strategy legible. Analysts tried to call it a rhetorical win, but the best of them reached for something bigger. Crockett didn't just win the debate. She redrew the political language of poverty, one primetime panelist said, as the studio lights dimmed to let the line breathe. The sentence ricocheted from think pieces to talk radio and back. Not because it sounded pretty, but because it named the shift. Poverty talk had been a museum of euphemisms. Overnight, the glass cases cracked. People weren't exhibits again. They were witnesses. And somewhere beneath the noise, the image of J.D. Vance tapping his pen kept replaying like a tell. Constituents saw it and remembered the vote sheets. Staffers saw it and heard the hollow, careful statement he'd signed. The accusation that had sounded so confident a day before now felt like a slogan rattling in an empty can. Meetings that would have opened with his talking points instead started with the clip, and the question was always the same. If the facts are this clear, why were the votes this easy? By the end of the news cycle, his brand had shifted a single notch, from forceful to flimsy, from certain to staged. The map did not change that day. The pipes didn't magically run clear, and the ovens didn't become furnaces, but the conversation changed shape. Fast, public, unavoidable. "I'm not in her party, but she's right," kept appearing like a stubborn watermark under every new thread, refusing to fade. A historic moment in the hearing room wasn't a trophy. It was a timestamp for when the storyline broke. "Do you have facts or just slogans?" hovered wherever vagueness tried to pass for thought. "She's right about us" made it impossible to pretend the rural frame and the urban frame were different pictures. By the time midnight rolled over the feed, the edges had been drawn. The clip had done what hearings almost never do. It moved people who don't watch hearings. It gave organizers a sentence, voters a mirror, and pundits a vocabulary that didn't insult the subject. The cost for the man who tried to turn pain into a prop was immediate. J.D. Vance didn't lose an argument. He lost the benefit of the doubt. In the court of a country that had just watched both the numbers and the faces, he sounded like noise in a room finely tuned to signal. When the headlines cooled and the lights went dark, she booked the first flight home. The Dallas air hit warm and close as Jasmine stepped off the jetway and moved fast through the terminal. No entourage, no podium. Her phone kept buzzing, cable invites, editorials, national praise. But she let them stack while the car rolled past long blocks of sun-baked apartments and porch fans turning slow. At the district office, the lobby was already full, tenants clutching file folders, a grandmother with a grocery bag of documents, a janitor on break still in a navy shirt that smelled like bleach. Jasmine dropped her carry-on by the door and said, "Staff meeting, now." They crowded into the bullpen between cubicles and case boxes, and she didn't waste a breath. "Don't treat this as a victory. Treat this as a reminder. We need to keep fighting." Ah. The room steadied around her voice. She pointed to a whiteboard that still had last week's intake list in dry erase. Pending inspections, utility shutoff appeals, emergency vouchers. "Triage by urgency," she said. "Evictions and heat first, federal forms second, follow-ups third. Nobody leaves a voicemail unanswered." A young caseworker raised a hand. 2 shelters at capacity, 1 landlord not returning calls. "Then we show up," Jasmine said. "We do not let a locked door define a life." She assigned pairs to blocks, pulled 3 volunteers into the phone bank, and told the comms aide to pause every interview request not tied to a resource drive. The applause from the hearing was miles away. The clock here ticked in rent due dates. By noon, the office looked like a field hospital. A folding table became a document station. A battered printer coughed out forms, while a retired teacher helped highlight deadlines. Jasmine moved from chair to chair, not as a drop-in dignitary, but as a worker among workers, reading dates, circling sections, dialing supervisors on speaker so residents could hear the tone change when an office answered to a member of Congress. When a clerk somewhere tried to bounce a call, Jasmine said, "Stay with me. We are on the record," and the bottleneck loosened. The work had no soundtrack, no glamour. It had checklists, coffee gone cold, and a line that did not shorten so much as it kept moving. Late afternoon brought a community room that smelled like pine sol and church potlucks. Folding chairs were set 5 across, 6 deep, with a mic on a plastic podium and a hand-painted banner taped to a cinder block wall. Jasmine faced neighbors, landlords, teachers, a bus driver still in uniform. "I know the clip is everywhere," she said, "but we are not here for a clip. We're here to get people housed." She let the murmurs settle, then named the first lesson without varnish. Poverty is not a personal failure. It is the result of policy. She didn't gild it with theory. She laid out how zoning, lending, wage floors, and infrastructure decide who breaks and who doesn't. If the rules produce the same pain in the same places for decades, the problem is the rules. Heads lifted, note pages filled. She took a step from the podium and planted the second stake. City or country, both deserve attention. She drew a clean line between a leaking ceiling in South Dallas and a failing well in rural Ohio, not to compare wounds, but to expose the seam politicians love to pull. "Different skylines, same cold," she said. "Different zip codes, same fear when the notice hits the door." She spoke in the language of stores and shifts, school buses and space heaters, because that's where people live. The point wasn't to blur identities. It was to refuse the cheap script that says help for one must mean hunger for the other. She looked straight into the camera someone had propped on a stack of hymnals. "Division serves politicians. It does not serve the people." The sentence landed like a gavel. She described the playbook without naming enemies, how outrage cycles starve budgets, how slogans get fed while furnaces stay broken. "If a headline tells you to hate your neighbor," she said, "ask who profits when you look away from the broken pipe." A contractor in the back, arms dusted with drywall, nodded slowly. A teacher whispered, "That's exactly it," to the counselor beside her. The room wasn't cheering, it was learning. In the Q&A, she kept the tempo tight, 90 seconds per question, 15 seconds to confirm a name, a staffer assigned to every raised hand with a problem that couldn't wait. Then she closed the binder and changed register from policy to promise. "We must not let anyone feel invisible. Their voices must be heard in the most powerful rooms." She didn't pitch it like a slogan, and it didn't sound like one. It sounded like instructions. She told the crowd what most powerful rooms meant: planning commissions, budget committees, state offices, Hill hearings, and how to enter them with petitions, affidavits, and numbers that refused to be ignored. The applause wasn't loud. It was long. Back at the office, the team regrouped under fluorescent hum. They updated the board. 4 emergency vouchers expedited, 2 illegal lockouts reversed, 1 hospital social worker looped into a shelter placement, 3 code enforcement checks scheduled. Jasmine read the list the way a medic reads a chart, Grateful for the wins, hungry for the next. A staffer asked whether they should cut a victory reel from the national segment. The answer was clean. Not today, Jasmine said. We cut a resource reel. Hotline, hours, walk-ins, partners. If it doesn't move a life, it doesn't go live. The room smiled, not because it was flashy, but because it was clear. Before they broke for the night, she gathered everyone by the front desk, next to a stack of donated backpacks and a jar of pens that always managed to disappear. Repeat it back to me, she said, and they did, like a call and response. Poverty is not a personal failure. It is the result of policy. City or country, both deserve attention. Division serves politicians. It does not serve the people. She nodded, then gave them the piece she had carried home like a stone in her pocket. Don't treat this as a victory. Treat this as a reminder. We need to keep fighting. No one clapped. They simply went back to their desks and opened tomorrow's files tonight. Word spread in a slower, sturdier way than virality. Through church bulletins, neighborhood apps, union boards at bus depots. A shelter volunteer shared the resource reel on a shift chain. A librarian taped the intake schedule to a branch corkboard. A landlord who used to stonewall called the office and asked to walk a building with code inspectors. Nothing glamorous happened, which is another way of saying the important part began. A mother got a call before the sheriff did. A veteran found a room before the cold snap hit. A senior had a space heater delivered and a work order filed in the same day because a staffer refused to accept next month as a timeline. Jasmine ended the week where she started it, in motion, between a tenant clinic and a school gym that smelled like varnish and sneakers. Reporters kept asking for another big moment. She kept offering them a spreadsheet and an address. If you want the story, she said evenly, film the repair, not me. She had learned the paradox of real work. The more you do, the fewer headlines you need. In quiet hours, she wrote down what the hearing had clarified into simple rules. Policy changes pain, attention changes policy. Organized neighbors change attention. She pinned the page above her desk and underlined the last line twice. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything, like subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.